So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to the show. This is Vegan World 2026, the moonshot of our generation, episode 26. And today we're going to be talking about rethinking food and agriculture. How do we reimagine our entire food system and through it, reimagine our entire way of living? And today we are joined by Laila Kassam, the co-editor, along with her dad, of this amazing book with the same title, Rethinking Food and Agriculture. Laila, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
How did you even start thinking about writing this book?
Oh, well, I think the seeds were planted many years ago. You know, so I'm a social scientist. I'm an economist by training, and my father is an expert in sustainable agriculture. And we've both had our careers in the world of international development. And I think we've both, over the years, been questioning hugely that paradigm in different ways. And also knowing that our different disciplines really complemented each other. And I think we were both, over the years, pushing each other to think of things in different ways. So really learning. And then a few years ago, my father had been editing a book on a 3-volume edition on conservation agriculture, and really questioning the dominant paradigm of agriculture. And at the same time, I had been, I had enough of development, and I was really questioning that paradigm. And so there was this space that opened up of real questioning, and kind of like, we need to move, we need to do something else, do something really, really that's going to challenge the status quo. And at that time, Elsevier had approached my father to edit a book on sustainable agricultural intensification, and he'd asked me to co-edit it with him. And I said, let's make it into something bigger, not just agriculture, but the whole structure of the food system, the drivers, because it's not just the agricultural paradigm that's completely messed up. It's being driven by a destructive economic system, and underneath that, there's the values and ethics that underpin it. And so, and I also often say that, I was getting really active in the animal liberation movement, and also thinking about environmental issues. And I saw all of these things as connected, and I wanted to read a book that made these connections, all of these pieces. I could find books on one or the other, but not one that really made all these connections of the things that we were interested in. So I often say we basically produced the book that I wanted to read. That's basically it.
Awesome! It's an amazing book, and I was I'm just blown away the depth and breadth of it. And then realizing that there is still more to be done, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think about how much work went into that book, and all the individual authors who have all spent their lives on their particular topics, bringing that to the book. And when I look at it now, I think, gosh, it is just the beginning. We've uncovered one layer. And now is the work of actually making it practical. We've developed a framework within which we want, we've got a vision for a truly sustainable and just food system for all, not just for humans, but for other animals and the planet. And so we have this framework that we call inclusive responsibility that we can talk about in a bit, if you like. But it's kind of like, so now the next step is, how do we make that practical? How do we apply it to our different situations? And I think, I mean, that's the next project.
No. I mean, if you look at what science is telling us, I mean, we are literally. So I think of us as a race car driver that just turned the corner and sees a wall.
Yeah.
And the passengers are telling us, hey, but we've always driven fast, and we've always put our foot on the accelerator. So ignore the wall, keep going.
And I feel like some of the passengers can't see the wall.
They cannot see the wall.
What are you talking about? Everything's fine.
Right, I know. It's just, from me, from an engineering perspective, it is just mind-boggling that people are not seeing it. It's just mind-boggling. But in your chapter, the chapter at I think it was chapter 2, where you talk about the dominionism.
Right.
Right. And so explain a bit about the dominionism and
Okay.
the roots of the food system.
Yeah. So first, to say that this chapter is a chapter that I co-authored with an amazing person called Jim Mason, who wrote the most incredible book called An Unnatural Order, uncovering the roots of our domination of nature and each other, first published in 1993. And his thesis in that book and in our chapter is that basically our Western worldview is rooted in an agrarian culture which holds this dominionist view towards the living world, that we view the living world as something that we are above and separate from, and something that we can dominate. And that includes other animals, it includes plants, it includes ultimately each other, and ourselves, because we are also nature. So if we're separated from nature, we're separated from ourselves. And this, he goes back more than 10,000 years to before agriculture, when we were what people call hunter-gatherers, but he calls foragers, because actually the role of hunting has been very overestimated. And we at that time we saw other animals as our kin. And they gave us a sense of continuity with nature. And we had a worldview which saw ourselves as part of and within the living world, not ideologically, but because that was our lived experience. And so when we started settling and farming and herding and domesticating other animals, we had to come up with new myths to justify the exploitation, especially of other animals, who we had seen as powerful beings before. And so, this idea of speciesism and domination of nature, which is then also reinforced by our institutionalized sort of religions in terms of having dominion over nature and of other animals. And then also then if we look at the Enlightenment and our scientific paradigm, and we look at the writings and the teachings of people like Bacon and Descartes, the fathers of modern science, that really again, reinforce this idea that we're separate from nature. And in my view, and in this chapter, I think we make a compelling case that, what is happening right now, the multiple interconnected crises that we are facing, this wall that so many of us cannot see, the root cause of that is our dominionist worldview, this idea that we are separate from and we can dominate nature. And that has, and so many of us are unaware that we are actually even holding these worldviews. We hold these views unconsciously, but everything in our society, all of the rules and norms reinforces this worldview. And it's led us to where we are today.
Right. So I call these the axioms of civilization, It's something that we just take for granted as the truth. And so I was using the term supremacism, but I guess it's the same thing.
I think it's the same thing.
So actually I formulated two axioms that we hold, which one is the supremacism, the axiom of supremacism, that life is a competitive game in which those who have gained an advantage can possess, enslave, and exploit animals, nature, and the disadvantaged for their pursuit of happiness. The second axiom is that the pursuit of happiness is best accomplished by stoking and satisfying a never-ending series of latent desires. This is the axiom of consumerism, I call it, which is also kind of built in. You see all these ads and you say, why are they showing you all these ads? Well, that's axiomatic, right?
Right. No, absolutely. So, I mean, I suppose another way or a part of that is sort of a self-interest or selfishness or individualism, and all those sorts of things seem to go together with that, which really keeps capitalism going, doesn't it?
Right, absolutely. Yeah. So it says that, if you have an advantage, then your taste buds are much more important than someone else's life.
Yeah.
Right. It may not, even slaves, right? I mean, we have slavery built into the food system. It's just incredible, the kind of oppression that's happening.
Absolutely. It's exploitative on every level. And one thing that came up for me when you were describing supremacy about not only other animals and nature, but disadvantaged groups, this again in this chapter, this idea of the herding cultures, so those cultures that were herding other animals, it led to social stratification. They were hierarchical, very patriarchal, expansionist, because they needed more land and more water, because herding, grazing is so destructive, and so in those dynamics then comes going and conquering other tribes and getting slaves, starting to view women as breeders, just as we would view animal husbandry. I mean, husband, it's so entrenched, so it's not just supremacy over other animals, it's supremacy or dominionism at every level.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So ultimately it was the I guess the religious community that kind of sanctioned it, allowed this to continue, or do you think, what is their role?
Oh, well, I think this has been going on for 10,000 years or more. So I think in terms of, I would say that we use religion now as more just as a kind of justification. So I would say that it gives us more justification and excuse, and reduces our guilt around the things that I think each one of us knows in our hearts. If we were actually connected to ourselves, to our true nature of compassion and love, which has been cut off because of our this disconnection from nature, etc., then we would know that. And so there's something in us that knows. So I would say that our religions and our sacred texts, etc., give us a get out clause and give us a justification, and for our supremacist and dominionist worldviews. I think a lot of the sort of the sacred texts codified things that we already believed. I think that's my view. What do you think?
But I also think that would you say that some of those religious texts have been misinterpreted, or have been sort of conveniently interpreted to mean this way?
Yes, no, I would say that, but I would also say I'm really not an expert on this area. Okay. But I would, from my own experience, let's say, growing up as a Muslim, I would say yes. I think there's a lot of, we use things as weapons, and as to justify our own desires and our own ideas about things. So yes, I would say that there's been a misinterpretation for sure.
Right. So tell us a bit more about the breadth of the chapters that you have in the book.
Yeah, I mean, the scope is really vast, and we wanted to, in a way, it's kind of there in the title. We wanted to rethink, so to deconstruct and to really get to some of the root causes and drivers of what's happening today, and at the same time to then reconstruct, but coming from a place of having deconstructed down to the sort of some of the root causes. So the book, after the introduction, it opens with a chapter by Rupert Sheldrake about that critiques the mechanistic and reductionist dominant scientific paradigm that we're functioning in, and as you talked about, those axioms or those dogmas that our current scientific paradigm is based on, we think it's unbiased and it's value neutral, and it's not. And so we have to, so we started off that the book with this, let's really question the fundamentals of everything, including science, which we think is so, so objective and so,
Right.
So we started off with that, and then we went on to looking at dominionism and the roots of our domination of nature, and over the last 10,000 years, as we've just talked about, and then. My goodness, I'm going to have to look at the book.
No problem. Yeah.
It's massive. Okay, and so then, and this is another really important thing that I wanted to bring in, especially as an economist and a social scientist. It's this idea of the corporate food regime.
Right.
And when people talk about, it's just about supply and demand, and we just need to reduce demand, for example, or it's not. We have a food system that is set up to serve the needs and the interests of a small handful of corporations, and they create the rules, and they have so much power that we don't know. And the roots of our current corporate food regime are in colonialism and the colonial food regime. So we've got quite a dense but amazing chapter on that by Philip McMichael, who's a professor at Cornell, who came up with one of the people who came up with food regime theory. And then we have a chapter on development as neocolonialism, and that's something that I really wanted to bring in, because one of the things that I had really come to understand, I'd spent 15 years working in international development, and it just became very apparent to me that this is an extension of the colonial project.
Right.
And so we've got a case study on the Gates-funded New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition in Africa, and this chapter just shows how it's a front for land grabbing in Africa. It's shocking, and then it's not shocking either, if you see what I mean.
I know. When I started studying this, and I realized that I had been fooled all along, that India got independence, and these are all stories we were told, right? Absolutely. And I was mad. I was angry for a while. I just wanted to take it out on somebody. But eventually I realized that they were also, like this, Rousseau said that he who is a master of others is more a slave than they.
Right.
They are also stuck, in the same web.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I look at this. I think we are all victims of this toxic system, even those of us, and actually in different ways, we are still all pawns. We are still, unless we are actively, really actively, and it's very difficult in this system to be actively trying to destroy it, because there's so many incentives not to, because our careers, our comfort, etc. But we are all victims of this, including I often think the CEOs of these corporations. It's I don't know. Anyway. So then we've got a chapter on the myth of the food crisis by Jonathan Latham. And one of the narratives, we talk about narratives and how powerful they are of big corporations, is that we need to feed the world, and that's why we need GMOs, we need agrochemicals, because otherwise you're condemning poor people to starvation. And this narrative is supported by models from FAO and IFPRI, these big international organizations, which they model that we're going to need X% more food by the year 2050. And Jonathan Latham does a really brilliant critique of the main FAO model and shows that it totally overestimates this idea of a crisis. And this crisis narrative isn't it so useful for in order to control people and to make them think, so we've got that, and it's a brilliant chapter. And then we've got a chapter on animal ethics, and of course that was really important to us, in order to really try and to bring in this, especially in many books around food and environmental ethics, animals are, I don't know, they're either missed out, or they're thought about in terms of species or in terms of ecosystem health, not in terms of individuals. And so we've got this brilliant chapter by Robert C. Jones, and it's called Animal Ethics as a Critique of Animal Agriculture, Environmentalism, Foodieism, Locavorism, and Clean Meat. And it really busts so many of the myths that environmentalists peddle out in terms of being sort of anti-vegan, etc., etc. And it's really a brilliant chapter.
Yeah.
And then we've got a few more chapters on, the food system overall. And then the book shifts in terms of looking at the paradigm of agriculture. So there's a chapter that my father and I wrote called Paradigms of Agriculture, which really critiques the Green Revolution narrative.
Right.
And you probably know a lot about that. One of the hotspots was India. And this, the Green Revolution, the package of modern varieties and agrochemicals and irrigation, totally inappropriate for small farmers, but totally appropriate for corporations to make lots of money. And we critique that narrative that it saved India from starvation, et cetera, and then look at alternative paradigms. And I think this is when the book kind of shifts into new ways forward. So alternative paradigms of organic agriculture, regenerative agriculture, conservation agriculture, and agroecology, and we assess them and talk about the pros and cons. And then we've got a couple more chapters on conservation agriculture. And then we've got a chapter on GM crops from a GM scientist who is really quite brilliant, and asking the question, will gene-edited and genetically modified crops fail sustainable food systems? And her answer, after a massive literature review and a case study of golden rice, is yes, it will fail.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I mean, this is just another example of this reductive, mechanistic mindset.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just like the Green Revolution, and sort of the gene revolution is kind of like the extension of the Green Revolution. And then we've got a really lovely chapter on sustaining agricultural biodiversity and heterogeneous seeds, which is the alternative to GM, which is, locally adapted seeds that farmers have been collecting and refining for generation after generation, which is being destroyed. That local seed system is being destroyed by corporate-controlled sort of GM seeds. And we later in the book we talk about food sovereignty and the right of people to have control over their own food systems. And seed sovereignty is at the basis of food sovereignty. So if you're trying to control the food system, then you need to control seeds. And I think this is really what's happening. And then we've got a chapter on healthy diets as a guide to responsible food systems. So that's all about the scientific and clinical evidence behind whole food plant-based diets, and talks about not only human health but also planetary health. And it's a brilliant chapter written by my sister Shireen Kassam and a few others, including my other sister Zara Kassam, who are both medics and lifestyle. They've been trained in lifestyle medicine as well. So that's another great chapter.
You have an amazing family.
Honestly, thank you, and I think I do. We all feel so blessed, and we're all kind of on this path together, but with our different perspectives, and so it's yes,
you do.
Yeah. And so we've got another chapter on knowledge systems for inclusive responsibility. So it's again looking at local and indigenous knowledge systems and sort of bringing that back into balance with sort of mainstream science, I suppose, or scientific ways of viewing the world. When we think about this sort of logical, rational way of knowing, we think in the West that that's the only way. There are other ways of knowing. There's experience. There's indigenous knowledge. There's so many other ways of knowing. So we need to come back into sort of balance between those two and have a synergy. And we've got a great chapter on social movements in the transformation of food and agriculture systems by Nassim Nabari of Seed the Commons, which is a really great organization that's trying to organize farmers and build the veganic movement. And this chapter, there's many brilliant things about this chapter, but the one thing that I love so much is her critique of grazing. And she shows the colonial narrative of the grazing, this idea that we need to, have cows in order to, we need to interfere in nature, basically, for nature to nature. I mean, that's basically what what I think, and you know, when you think about it like that, you're like, oh my goodness,
It sounds absurd, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. And yet this narrative is just becoming so big,
Right.
and it's, you know, I do think it's a massive problem that, you know, I think we need to have alternative, compelling narratives and visions, rather than, I guess, constantly debunking the myths of regenerative agriculture. We need to kind of just, okay, no, this is our vision, and you know what, our vision doesn't involve injustice and exploitation.
It's also from an engineering perspective. It's just you know, it makes so much sense, right? Because we eat about 1.5 billion tons of food every year, the dry weight food. And the total biomass of wild animals, wild megafauna, was 300 million tons. So how the heck are you going to get 1.5 billion tons out of 300 million tons? You cannot, right?
Oh.
So whereas plants, they constitute 2.5 trillion tons.
Yeah.
So our food demand is less than 0.1%, 0.2% of the biomass of carbon, plant carbon on the planet, right? So clearly we can sustain ourselves with plant foods.
Right.
And you cannot sustain yourself with animal foods. There's no question.
No, and the thing that's so often missed out of the grazing narrative is the fact that we will still have to drastically reduce our consumption of other animals if we were to switch to regenerative agriculture, because the planet we haven't got enough land to do it this way. But nobody talks about that, you know, because it's, you know, then people are going to start saying, oh no, we don't want regenerative agriculture either if we can't keep eating our hamburgers.
Right.
Yeah.
So Laila, are we all going to become start foraging for our food again?
Well, I don't think that's a great idea right now. I was reading an article the other day about how lockdown, you know, everybody suddenly got interested in foraging, and it's like destroying all the areas that people, you know, that only a few people would go foraging. So I don't think we're set up for that. No, but wouldn't that be nice? You know, so I think, I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? And in the final chapter of the book, we try and envision. First of all, we envision we talk about the principles that would underpin the food system of the future. And we draw some of the themes of the book, and we talk about the need for holistic paradigms and mindsets, the need for multifunctional and sustainable and ecologically sustainable agriculture systems, the need to decentralize power in the food system, the need for healthy plant-based and sustainable diets, etc., etc. And then we come up with, you know, this idea of an inclusively responsible food and agriculture system as having certain characteristics, which would be, you know, ecologically sustainable, relevant for smallholders, meeting the needs for whole food plant-based diets, integrating into the social movements that are resisting the corporate food regime, which is really, really important.
Absolutely.
And respecting and protecting the rights of all sentient beings, humans and non-humans, and of nature. Now, this is a very long answer to, are we going to be all foraging? I'm getting to the crux of it, which is that, you know, the conventional paradigm does none of these things, and so an inclusively responsible food system would hopefully do all of these things. And we think that there are loads of different ways and different paradigms within this sort of larger framework that could tick all of these boxes. So veganic permaculture, and we come up with conservation agriculture-based veganic agroecology, so that there's like different ways to, you know, there are different, probably lots of different other names that we could come up with of paradigms that actually tick all of these boxes. So no, I don't think we're all going to become foragers. We're far too down the line of Western kind of, you know, civilization or whatever you want to call it. But I think that there are paradigms of agriculture which can be truly sustainable and just. And for us, that is CA-based veganic agroecology, which would be, one of the things that, these regenerative agriculture people talk about is, well, we can't be tilling the soil and releasing all the carbon for the grain, et cetera. And, one of the principles of conservation agriculture is minimum soil disturbance. So that means minimum, in fact, no till, and also keeping the soil covered and diversified cropping systems. And then if you include it by default, it doesn't use animal products, even though farmers aren't vegan, because the most ecological way is not to pass, biomass through an animal. It is to return it to the soil and let the earthworms and the soil do their thing as they would in a forest. And so I think there are many ways that we can create, or already, it's already happening. There are already organic conservation agriculture farmers all over the world. I mean, conservation agriculture covers 15% of agriculture right now. So it's something that is scaling. Yes, it's not all organic though. So there's a subset that's organic, but it totally reduces, massively reduces agrochemical, water, fuel use, and labor. So one of the things that I've sort of realized recently when I've been, going on watching webinars on Vegan Organic Network and Seed the Commons is that we think that veganic farming is niche. It's not niche. We think veganic permaculture is niche. It's like permaculture is niche, and then the veganic or the vegan permaculture is this like little subset. And actually, it's not. Maybe like the whole thing might be niche, but the principles of conservation agriculture are actually the production principles that underlie permaculture. Now, on permaculture, you've got all sorts of other things, but in terms of the actual production system, permaculture also doesn't encourage tillage. It also encourages cover crops and diversity, etc. So there's loads of farmers doing ecologically sustainable agriculture without animal inputs. They don't call themselves veganic, but I think this is a massive opportunity for us to link up with these farmers and to be organizing and exchanging knowledge and building something together. So that's a realization I've had recently. So I'm just I haven't thought about it too much.
That's wonderful. I mean, that's where you come in, right? As a social scientist to help make this happen.
Yeah.
That's the gift you bring.
Yeah. And also just to say that my father is the moderator of a global community of practice for conservation agriculture. And I think a lot of people would say that he has helped to globalize conservation agriculture. And he's been working on this for the last 15 or 20 years. So this sort of exponential growth of conservation agriculture is really, it's been farmer driven, and it's been through networks and peer-to-peer learning, etc. It's not been necessarily through government support or it's been grassroots led. And I think that's something else that, well, I think this is partly what you're doing, isn't it, with Vegan World 2026. So again, I think this is something that we can learn from. Yeah,
for me, Vegan World 2026 is basically just common sense. that when you see a wall, you have to hit the brakes. You cannot keep accelerating. Right? It's what science is telling us we should be doing.
Yeah.
So the questions in the chat. First question is, how can we learn from other movements? BLM and Me Too, etc., to make the vegan movement more effective?
Okay, but this is a great question, and I think one of the things that, well, firstly, I should say that one of my other hats that I wear is that I work with an organization called Animal Think Tank. I mean, that's my full-time job, and we are building the foundations of a movement for animal freedom in the UK. So we're talking about a mass movement. Protest, direct action, civil disobedience, etc. And we are currently building those foundations and building things like our strategy and our structure and our culture and our narrative, our sort of, the narrative that's going to align with the values that people already hold. And so one of our things has been to really look at what past social justice movements have done. And there is a brilliant book called This is an Uprising by the Engler brothers that really looks at past successful social justice movements, and what we can learn from them in terms of our present movements. And so there is quite a few things. There's an idea that we need to make structural change. Well, actually, there is a whole ecology. There's a whole ecology, a social movement ecology, which is made up, when you look at past successful social justice movements, which is made up of different organizations and individuals and groups with different theories of how to make change, but all working synergistically together as they would as an ecosystem.
Right.
So we've got personal transformation. So, let's say going vegan or anti-racist practice or, Then we've got building alternatives. So for us, maybe it's vegan businesses, it's sanctuaries, maybe maybe it will be, community-based policing rather than, to defund the police. It would be an alternative way of doing those functions. So then we have a big area which is transforming the dominant institutions that shape society. This is where structural change comes in. And that is, you can do it from the inside through lobbying and party politics, and then you can do it from the outside, either through NGOs making, trying to make reforms in either corporate policies or legal reforms. And then you've got mass protest movements that are actually trying to change the political weather and shift public opinion, with the idea that governments and laws follow public opinion. Now, in the vegan movement, we're really good on the personal transformation in terms of going vegan and asking others to go vegan. We've got some building of alternatives, we've got sanctuaries, we've got, whatever we might think about, cell-based meat, etc. And then we've got some structural change, and we've got the welfare type NGOs that are doing corporate campaigns, but we don't really have the sort of mass movement that's doing direct action, the sort of the Gandhi type thing of of the Salt March, of really of disruption, of sacrifice. And in the UK, it's been really amazing to watch the growth of Extinction Rebellion that has been, putting a lot of the lessons of past social justice movements into practice, and has grown exponentially. I mean, they've come to a bit of a plateau at the moment, but partly COVID as well. And so I think one of the main things for me, learning from other movements, is the importance of this ecology mindset, that we need lots of different ways of doing things, and they all support each other, because it's not one way that's needed. But secondly, that there is a gap in the UK, at least where I am, of the mass protest movement gap. We've got now Animal Rebellion, which is an organisation that Animal Think Tank seeded. But again, it's partly an environmental message, whereas the Animal Think Tank is trying to build an anti-speciesist mass movement. So for me, and in the book, This is an Uprising, they really talk about momentum-driven organising, which is, you do direct action, you get attention, you're pushing the injustice out into the public consciousness, and you're asking people to pick a side. So it's, we have to be a little bit polarizing. And then you're really trying to push people towards you, and you build momentum. So you absorb some new people that come along into a structure and an organization that's solid, and then you increase public participation, and then it's this cycle that goes again and again and builds your movement. And so I think for us, we need to do that. We need to get brave and build strategic campaigns with serious demands, and really build our power that way. And that's what one of the things that I'm working on anyway with Animal Think Tank.
See, I see it a little differently, because I've been working with Vegan World 2026, and so I see it as this is a Galileo moment in human history. Literally, we are saying that the sun does not go around the earth goes around the sun. So we are saying that the axioms of civilization the axiom of consumerism and the axiom of supremacism are both false.
Right.
Because they don't align with reality.
Yeah.
So, which means you really have to build an entire new structure, an entire set of institutions, infrastructure, a constitution, and currency systems based on correct axioms.
Right.
So I'd say, okay, instead of the axiom of consumerism, it should be the axiom of inner peace. That the pursuit of happiness is best accomplished by looking for it within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this is what I call the self-mastery rule. So we need to be teaching people this, and that should be the normal. That people should always, it should be in the ether that we are looking for happiness within ourselves. Mm-hmm. So why are you advertising to me? We should be questioning those things. And then the second, instead of the axiom of supremacism, I call it the axiom of homo ahimsa, which is that all life is one family in which we each bring our unique skills to give all we can, receive what we need, and become all we are, which is the vitality code of Dr. Shelley Ostroff. So then I say, well, if those are the correct axioms, then where is the structure for that? Where is the civilization that builds that, mm-hmm. right? Until we show that, until we create that, we cannot demand that our leaders change. Because what are they going to change to? They're stuck. They're stuck. I mean, they're all, they're in a spider web. Mm. And they're little flies in a spider web, right? So, and they're not going to move because they're stuck there.
So that's a beautiful, beautiful vision, and I think you're probably trying to do more than we are at Animal Think Tank, because you're taking on the whole system, which is great, admirable. And for us, it's I suppose the first. I think also this is a never-ending kind of struggle, isn't it?
Right.
Or journey. And I think for us, the objective of the sort of, I guess, this round would be a law that I don't know exactly what it would look like, but that would end the killing or trade or slaughter of other animals. Mm-hmm. And I think what you're describing is the building of alternatives. And actually completely, so you're not even, it's not even within the current system. You're not trying to transform the current system. You're building a new system entirely. So I think that's the difference. And good luck. Like really, I really hope that you manage this, or that we together can do this. And I think that what Animal Think Tank is doing would play a part in this, because it's also Absolutely. About consciousness raising. When you do things like direct action and create transformative experiences for people, but also push these ideas out into the public consciousness, you are shifting consciousness. You're shifting public consciousness. So, and I suppose I would say that all of what you're doing, what we're doing, what so many other people are doing in the different parts. I don't think you're fully in the animal ecology, because you're broader, I think, than just sort of animal liberation. It's like animal, human, earth liberation all in one.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think all of those things are absolutely needed. And yeah, I think that they can work in synergy with one another. And create opportunities for. So one of the things about mass protest is it opens up space. Mm-hmm. It shifts the Overton window. It can make things that were felt impossible a week ago suddenly possible, because people are talking about it. So I think from our perspective, I think it's also it's something that's very experimental. So you do something and you see what happens, and then you iterate. Mm-hmm. So if we talked this time next year, it might be a completely different story as we learn and grow with what we're doing. Yeah.
We have starting something called Climate Healers Academy,
mm-hmm.
where we are talking about, so how would you build this new system or create this new system, and how would you train people to be in the new system, right? So essentially, how would you live in this new system? So we have to have courses for people to take. So in fact, I'm thinking of getting children to teach the adults.
Wonderful.
Because children are so much better at seeing human supremacism. So overcoming your human supremacism is something that I think children can help us, help the adults. And so I would love to have you and your sisters and your dad as educators on this, because I think what you bring is you bring a unique perspective on the food system and seeing it for what it really is. Because we kind of get stuck in our day-to-day purchases and things, and we really don't see how did this happen.
No, absolutely. And I think it's I think it's totally normal for people to be like, stuck in the weeds of it, because it's like we live in a system where we are just constantly on this treadmill of like, how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to, put food on the table, etc., etc. And there is no headspace for most of us to actually think about the big picture. And, I really feel that the glimpse that I have had is a massive function of my privilege to actually have the headspace and the time to think about these things and not be struggling, trying to, just live. But yes, I mean, I think, I think being able to make these connections is really important. And again, it's something that our school system and the way that we organize our disciplines, etc., really disincentivize us or stop us from making these connections, because we become experts in this one thing. So we can't make the connections, or it's really difficult to, because we're so focused on one particular aspect. But if you look back at history, the philosophers were also mathematicians and astrologers, etc. So I think it's not easy to see the connections. I feel like as I said before, I feel like we're just scratching the surface, or I certainly feel like I'm just scratching the surface. But I think, let's talk about how my father and my sisters and me can be involved, because, it sounds wonderful.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, because to me, we are fortunate to be in a position where we can think and we can actually imagine how we could stop this train from crashing into the wall, how the car from crashing into the wall, and how we can build something different. So maybe turn around a little bit and go to the side, and so that everyone can thrive on this planet. Because ultimately, it's just we are on spaceship Earth.
Yes.
And so I that's why I feel fortunate to be in a position where I can think and spend time like this. And especially given my training as a systems engineer, because systems engineers are trained to look at the big picture. That's our job.
Okay. I don't know what a systems engineer actually means.
Yeah, I mean, so they tell you, okay, we need to get data to go from here to there at 1 gigabit per second. So you figure out how to do it. So I have to look at all the interferences that could show up and understand how to address every one of them. Anyway, so so we are trained to be like that, right? Trained to be big picture people, like the people who design the spacecraft that goes to Mars. There's a systems engineer who's figuring out all of the pieces that need to go together so that it gets from here to there, right? And so fortunately, they needed systems engineers in this system for building things like spacecraft. And now I'm able to deploy that know-how into looking at the whole civilization itself. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, but thanks to people like you who are, making, laying bare what is happening in the food system, what's happening in different systems, so we can look at it and say, because that's what I do. I synthesize work of people like you.
Well, I think that I've synthesized other people's work. I mean, the role in this book for me was to make the connections and to think about all the pieces, because it's massive. Like, you can't be an expert in all of these areas, but I think there aren't enough people making those connections and sort of bringing the experts from different disciplines together. And then, so much creativity comes at the intersection of at the boundaries of different disciplines. I mean, there's lots written about this. And so I sort of feel like, maybe that is my role. It's connecting, making connections, bringing different disciplines together, and then making new connections, because there's so many things that came up in the development of this book, and it's like new questions that require new thinking, and it's like, oh, but have we got the energy to do another book? Or is it even the right thing to be doing if we want to actually get the information out there? I mean, that's another question.
So
anyway.
When is the follow-up book coming?
Oh god. Well, I don't think there's going to be another academic book anytime soon, but I think my father and I are talking about like small, sort of lay person's books, not dense and full of jargon, etc.,
Right.
That you could read in a few hours. So we want to write something on organic conservation agriculture, and that paradigm, and to show all the ins and outs, but in a way that people can understand, and it's an alternative vision to regenerative. I mean, it is actually a regenerative paradigm. It just happens to be plant-based.
Exactly.
Right. So that's one, and another one is on inclusive responsibility. So we ended the book with this concept, and actually, I think that this requires now an exploration of what this actually means. And so I think, and from a personal perspective, from a food systems perspective, from all the different sort of layers, how does an application of this framework look like at different levels? But I don't think that we're ready to write that just yet. And I think what we want to do is, we've created this website called inclusiveresponsibility.earth with all the chapter extracts from the book. And we want to do interviews with the authors, like 20-minute interviews, so that people who are not going to read the book can actually just, listen to an overview, 20 minutes, and fill in some of the gaps. There's so many gaps in the book. We didn't talk about donut economics. We didn't talk about degrowth. We didn't talk about aquatic animals. This is very land-based. So there's so many gaps, and I sort of feel like that. But by doing that, new things are going to emerge. And I sort of feel like we're not quite ready to write the next thing. And I think we've still got some learning to do from others, and some new connections to make. So that's kind of what's in our mind. But everything takes so long.
That's awesome. I'm going to put that inclusiveresponsibility.earth. I'll put that on the video. Thank you, Jyoti, for that. Yeah, it's I think what you're doing here is incredible work, and thank you so much. The one question I had was, the book is so expensive.
Yes.
Why is it so expensive?
Okay. I'm so sorry. It is not our fault.
I know. I hear you. You're not making so much money off of it, right?
Oh gosh, if only. No. So basically, this is the way with academic publishing, and I didn't realize. I have to be honest. When we signed that contract, I didn't realize that it would be so expensive. I just didn't think about it. I was so excited about doing the book, and. The irony of writing or putting together a book that's very anti-capitalist in essence. There's a theme running through it, and yet a book that's over $150 or something. The irony is not lost on me. And academic publishing is a racket. It really is, and we will never do such a thing again. And so this is, one of the reasons why we want to make the messages of the book. Well, one of the many reasons, because people, even if it was £5, most people are not going to read a 400+ page dense academic book, are they? So, but it's one of the reasons that we would like to make the messages more accessible in terms of video and audio, etc. But if anybody wants any individual chapters, then just go to the website and go to the contact form and just send us a message. And, you can find the book online for free. So
Okay, good.
yes,
that's
if you know where
that's
to
good to
go,
know.
you can find it.
If you look hard enough, you will find it. Okay, good.
I know I didn't say that.
You didn't say.
Even though I'm live on Facebook, but anyway.
Jyoti suggested we should write our local libraries to get a copy of it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jyoti. This is absolutely right. Ask your local libraries, your university libraries to get a copy, because that's the way that it's going to become more accessible to people. So yeah, if you're a student or if you have a local library, please do ask.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you do a popular book, you can actually self-publish it and make it easily available to everybody.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Never again.
And I think your idea of having 20-minute videos from each author and interviewing them and then expanding on that and inclusive responsibility.earth, that's a brilliant idea.
Yes.
That'll get it to a lot more people than the book would. But the book is like a base that you created this foundation.
Yes. No, and the thing is, there were reasons, to do a book, because we wanted something credible. We wanted something rigorous. And it was a really great opportunity to bring different authors together, authors and academics and activists in different spaces. But it isn't about the book anymore. It's about the ideas in the book that we need to get out, really.
Right. I'm going to put the website for inclusive responsibility.earth. On the chat.
Thank you.
So it gets out to everybody. And so Jyoti says he's going to give a talk about your book in the Toastmasters. So thank you very much.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes, let's get the word out and the message out. And I think it will be a great idea to get libraries to keep these books.
That would be wonderful. Yes, thank you.
And thank you again for being here. Thank you for your incredible presence on this.
Oh, well, thank you. And it's been such a pleasure. It's been really enjoyable.
Okay. And I'll be in touch, we'll be in touch. And so if people want to contact you, is there a good way to contact you, or is it through the website?
Yeah, just contact me through the website. That would be great. That comes straight to my inbox. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful.
You can friend request me on Facebook as well.
Okay. Let's say, are you Laila Kassam on Facebook?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll put that out there as well. Thank you so much. So this will be on Facebook and YouTube. So hopefully you'll get a lot more out of this.
Lovely. Thank you.